All right, great. I think we can start. So welcome everyone to our private market webinar series. I'm Wissam Mansour, the founder and CEO of Equilink. We are a co-investment platform, cross-strategy private markets platform helping family offices, wealth managers, and banks to seamlessly and reliably co-invest alongside experienced GPs. Our topic of today is about impact investing and for family offices. I would like first to welcome our guest speaker, Leonardo Carvalho, who is our senior advisor. Leonardo has over 15 years of experience in private markets. He is both a thought leader and a practitioner in impact investing. He has held the position of impact investing strategist at UBS. Welcome, Leonardo.
Thank you very much, Wissam. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone joining the call today. It's a pleasure to be here with you and have a conversation about impact investing.
All right, great. So, as I said, our topic for today is about impact investing for family offices. Impact investing market is going from 1.3 trillion to about 4.5 trillion by 2030, which is an important asset class to keep in mind when it comes to investing, right? And this is based on Gin and Fairfield market research. Just for reference, Gin is the global impact investing network, one of the important, let's say, organizations when it comes to impact investing. So we're going to be touching on several topics like general definition, how do we go about impact investing, how is it different, taking some case studies, and we're going to close with some Q&A. So Leonardo, when it comes to impact investing and based on Gin again, impact investing is the investment made with the intention to generate positive and measurable social and environmental impact along a financial return. That's the official definition. What's your view on that?
Yeah, that's right. So according to the Gin, that's the right definition, Wissam. I like to essentially start these conversations by telling those listening what impact investing it's not. So impact investing, it's not a new asset class, and it's not philanthropy. It's essentially it's a new approach to investing where you consider environmental, social, and governance considerations and impact considerations alongside your typical commercial and financial considerations that you would include in your investment process. So essentially, it's about adding more information to the investment decision process. This is essentially what impact investing is.
No. And, there is as well touching on that point, because there is a part of a financial return as well, right? And for a lot of people, there is this kind of misconception about, okay, it's not a full, it has to have a financial return. So it's not like, as you said, a philanthropic, activity, right? So, it's important to keep in mind that it has to generate a financial return.
That's right. So if we can think of a spectrum of both, on one end, you have impact generating capacity. On the other hand, you have financial returns. So on the lower end, you would typically have philanthropy, where you have 100% impact, but you have no financial return. And on the other end of that spectrum, you would have non-impact investments that generate 100% financial returns, or generate 100% in terms of financial returns, but no impact. And everything in between can be considered an impact investing. So alongside that spectrum of impact and financial returns, you have different levels of both impact and financial return, and these are essentially impact investments.
Yeah, yeah. Should an investor expect less financial returns when it comes to impact investing, or should they still expect it depends on the sector, but let's say a below average for that specific industry or sector that they are investing, or should they still expect the lower returns?
That's right. So essentially, impact investing need not be concessionary return investments. It can be low return investments if the objective is to generate impact and you're looking to prioritize that element of the investment. You could have an instance where you would have investments that would generate very low investments, but a very high impact component. But you also have investments that are able to generate measurable positive impact alongside a financial return. So essentially think of, for instance, a private equity fund that generates these types of investments. You would typically have an impact private equity fund that would aim to achieve similar types of returns and at the same time measure and manage the impact that it generates alongside the financial return. So there are different levels of both financial return and impact that one can achieve. But you're right. Historically, there was a misconception that impact investing tended to be one, small in scale, and number two, low financial returns. That is no longer the case. So for instance, there's many long-term investors in the form of pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, for instance, Temasek out of Singapore, that have been investing in impact investing very large sums of capital for a long time. And so historically, that component of the scalability is no longer the case. And the same applies to financial returns. Impact investing can take place in both mature markets and emerging markets, and you can still achieve different level of commercial returns.
Yeah, very interesting. That's very interesting. You touch on the measuring the impact or the measurability aspect of impact investing. What's that? What are you measuring exactly then?
Sure.
And
So
how do you go about it?
yeah. So to answer that question, essentially there are three key elements that typically should be present in an impact investment.
Yeah.
The first one is intentionality. So the intention can come either from the investor or from the investee. The second component is something called additionality. And by that, we mean that the proceeds of the investment, they are directly linked to the impact that is being generated. So one can trace back the impact that is generated to the capital that was invested. And the third one is, the third key element for an impact investing is precisely what you just said, measurability. So essentially, in order to be an impact investing, it needs to be positive and it needs to be measurable. And when it comes to the measurability of impact, there are different approaches, there are different technologies, and there are different methodologies and frameworks. I think it will take a very long time for us to discuss each one of them and unpack all the different details about each one of the different methodologies. But I think for those on the call, I think the key important thing to take away from this conversation is that when it comes to measurability, there are different tools, there are different methodologies. Just to give you a couple of examples, there's one called the Impact Management Project, which is essentially based on 5 dimensions of impact. This is very common, especially among financial institutions. We are familiar with the SDGs, which, the Sustainable Development Goals. They were not originally designed to be an impact measurement framework, but nonetheless have more and more been used by investors to give them a sense of the impact metrics they want to achieve while they carry out these investments. So there are different methodologies. There's also something called the operating principles of impact measurement, which is a set of 9 principles that can help investors guide investors through all phases of the investment process. So there are different approaches to how you go about measuring the impact.
Yeah, yeah. We will touch a bit more on how do we, how a family office can, implement simple tools on that. But let me touch on one aspect of the three, areas: the intentional, measurable, and the additionality when it comes to impact investing. So can we touch again and to clarify for our audience the additionality point? Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's basically without the investment that is done in that specific opportunity, the impact is not generated, the social, environmental, and so on, right? But yeah, if you can touch again and clarify on that point.
Sure, absolutely. So you're right. Essentially, from additionality, we mean the capital that is injected as part of the investment is able
Yeah.
to generate the measurable impact, which means, for the most part, with two exceptions, impact investing takes place typically in private markets, because in private markets, you typically can trace back the capital directly to the impact. And I'll give you an example. So if you and I, let's say you're holding a stock of some company, let's say Unilever. So you sell me your stock of Unilever in the secondary market. This is literally an exchange of money for paper in the secondary market, distant from the company. The company may not even know about it. What is the measurable impact of that transaction? Zero.
Yeah.
But if you invest into, let's say, an impact fund, which is raising capital, that capital will be used to make direct investments into impactful entities that will then generate the measurable impact, report on that impact, and you can truly trace that back to your investment. That is the additionality piece.
Right, right. Yeah,
You
that's very, very interesting. So touching on the point of, fund investment, how do you go about selecting these funds? There are tons of funds that are there. How do you go about selecting the best managers, the best funds? Of course, you have performance matrices and so on, but from the impact aspect of these investments and GP selection, how do you go about selecting the GPs?
Sure. So if you remember how we talked about how impact investing, it's about adding more information to the diligence process.
Yeah.
To answer your question, typically when you vet just any fund manager, you would typically vet the fund manager against a set of financial, commercial, and legal considerations. Impact investing funds, you would typically look at these same financial, commercial, and legal considerations. But in addition to that, you're essentially looking at the ability of that fund to deliver on the impact thesis. And this is essentially mostly a set of qualitative metrics that you're looking at the fund to see if it has the ability to generate on the impact that it intends to generate. So for instance, you want to make sure that the impact is integrated throughout all phases of the investment process, for instance, from the origination all the way to the execution, to the exit, and to the reporting. You want to make sure that the impact fund has the right resources in order to generate and report on the impact. And I mean human resources, expertise, and capital. You want to see how the fund approaches the impact measurement and management piece, like we just talked about, what kind of methodologies they use, what kind of frameworks. If you want to see if the manager obviously has the ability to engage with the investees, something we call stewardship, how they go about engaging with the investee. You want to obviously look if the intentionality, the additionality, and the measurability triad element is clearly in place. And essentially, you want to also look if the fund manager belongs or is part of any industry standard setter, including the GIN you mentioned previously, or maybe the operating principles of impact. And then more specifically for the funds out of Europe, you want to see if they comply with the new set of disclosure regulations around impact investing funds. And this obviously directly relates to, for instance, the sustainable finance disclosure regulations. But in essence, you are trying to ensure that the fund manager can deliver on the impact thesis.
Right, right. Yeah, that's quite interesting. So we talked about selecting. How do we go about selecting the GPs on a high level, of course, but for impact investing, why is it important, to go into private markets? Why is it important the private market side versus public market when it comes to impact investing?
Sure. It's essentially because of the additionality element.
Mhm.
The more, for instance, if you look into passive public markets investments, you're typically very distant from the investee.
Yeah.
And your capital is not effectively generating any impact. So for instance,
Mhm.
you are making a transaction in the stock market, but that capital is not effectively being used to generate impact on the ground. And so
Mhm.
typically impact investments will typically happen in private markets. And by that, I mean either direct investments or indirect investments in the form of private equity and private debt.
Mhm.
Having
Mhm.
said that, again, I'll repeat that. Impact investing typically happens in private markets. There are essentially two exceptions to that rule. In public markets, you have a specific strategy called engagement. So essentially, the idea is you buy enough shares of a publicly traded company, enough to essentially have a say in the faith of that company.
All
So you're
right.
looking to engage with that company and take that company in a more impactful way. This is called
Mhm.
engagement, and it can be done either using equity or using debt. But with this one exception, most of the private markets investments, they typically have it in private markets, again, because you can clearly trace back the proceeds to the measurable impact.
All right, and that's quite interesting. Like when you have, let's say, a substantial stake or holding of a company like this, you can have an influence and let's say a more measurable, approach to your investment, right?
That's
If
right.
I compare that, we talked about the funds and investing in funds impact. How about a deal investing? You said about being engaged with a company and so on. So how do you see the deal going specifically in a company or a project? How do you see that fitting within a portfolio constructing for a family office?
So you can still be even if you are a bit distant from the GP space, you can still have a say in terms of the impact. You can try to provide expertise in the form of financial and
Mm.
non-financial tools. For
Yeah.
instance, on the impact measurement piece, on the methodologies, let's say you have the expertise, you can try to relay that onto the investment as well. And so there are different approaches to, even if you are working in a club deal and in a club transaction, there's value creation initiatives that you can do on the impact investing space, even if you don't have the direct channel to the GP. And that
Mhm.
again comes in the form of non-financial value creation initiatives to help the investee ultimately generate and report on the impact. So
Yeah.
there are ways for you to cooperate with the investee in order to help enhance the impact measurement and reporting capability of that investee.
Right. Right. How do you get across these deals, right? Specific deals. I'm not talking about funds. How do you go about finding these impact investing deals?
Sure. So that's a very good question, Wissam, because if we remove the impact lens for a bit, we are down to private markets again for the most part. And these
Mm.
deals are not very easy to find. Good
Mhm.
quality transactions are not very easy to find. When it
Right.
comes to impact, you have that extra challenge in the sense that obviously these deals are not easy to find, like I said, but number two, once you find it, how do you know its impact? How do you know it has impact potential? And that's
Mm-hmm.
where I think platforms such as EquiLink can play a
Mm-hmm.
very key role in the value chain, in the sense of sourcing impact transactions and vetting these impact investments, either direct investments or indirect investments, and
Yeah.
making sure that obviously these will ultimately be able to deliver on the impact that is promised. So I think digital marketplaces such as EquiLink can play a very important role in terms of sourcing quality transactions.
Right. Good to hear that. All right. Another important point is the due diligence part of the impact investing. How is it different from a typical private equity deal or investment process? If we focus specifically on the due diligence, how is it different?
So it's essentially, it differs because of that set of qualitative metrics that you would add into the vetting process. So essentially,
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at to see how the fund manager approaches impact, and if impact is embedded throughout all phases of the investment process. Again, looking back to see if the fund manager has the intention, if the capital is additional, and if there's measurable capability. And
Right.
instead, and then obviously in parallel to that, you want to see how the fund manager engages with the investee, because keep in mind that the impact that will be reported onto the investors will be
Mm-hmm.
collected from the investee itself. So it's
Mm-hmm.
very important for the investors of impact to ensure that the investee has the ability and the capacity to deliver on the impact data. And
Right.
so this is very important. Another very important element is to see if the GP, let's say in the case of a private equity impact fund, if it's
Mm-hmm.
approaching the impact reporting just as an upward accountability process aimed at the asset owners. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, if they're just looking to have a nice impact report so they can present to the asset owners every quarter or every 6 months, or if they also taking into account the actual impact users on the ground, and if they're making sure that the information comes from the impact users on the ground, which means this is also a downward accountability process
Mm.
tailored towards the impact users. So you want to make sure that the impact manager is striking a right balance between taking into account the impact users, a downward
Right.
accountability process, as
Mm.
well as making sure that that information is reported back onto the asset owners, up an upward accountability process. So essentially, these are some of the key differences that you typically have in a vetting process of an impact fund.
All right. Yeah, that's very insightful. Talking about that, the process, selection, GP deals, and so on. Can you give us like an example of a deal that you have done in the past, and how did you go about it? And just in general, what without, of course, disclosing any confidential information, but just to give our audience here an example of an impact investment that you have done, and how did you go about that?
Sure. So I can give you maybe an example of an indirect impact investment as well as a direct impact investing. So
Right,
an
that's
indirect
even better.
impact investment, I have worked in multiple transactions. Um, there's multiple impact fund managers which really do a great job in terms of
Mm.
generating the measurable impact alongside delivering on the financial returns which are promised on the PPM. But I think there's one that comes to mind now that I've worked in a couple of occasions, is a mid-size impact manager out of Holland. It's
Right.
essentially, I can disclose that it's public information. It's called Aquaspark. Essentially, they invest across the value chain of aquaculture. So anything from fish feeds all the way to fish farms, and they do that in a very environmentally positive impact generating way. Another, and to answer your question, the way I first came across that transaction was precisely through a digital marketplace of impact investing transactions. Another instance where this one was a direct investment that comes to mind now, a very impactful business out of the USA. It's an agri-tech company called Indigo Ag. Essentially a company using technology to enhance the soil where farming is made, with the view to make that soil into a very powerful carbon capture instrument. So effectively, these are some of the transactions that I've worked on. And to answer your question, the origination can come from multiple channels. In the case of the fund out of Holland, it was through a digital marketplace platform similar to Equilink. And as for the direct investment, was through essentially a financial institution.
All right. So it's very interesting what you mentioned, the example of the seed that enhance basically the carbon capturing. So how do you measure that?
So essentially, this particular company generated a number of environmental and social measurable impact. The environmental impact was in the form of carbon capture. So essentially tons of CO2 captured from non-impact farming processes. So essentially, one of the ways they approached it was that if it wasn't for this seed, this particular process of farming would have generated X tons of CO2. But with my technology, I'm able to reduce that down to Y number of CO2. So that is your measure. Sorry?
Yeah, I was saying, yeah, I'm just echoing basically.
And then in this particular case, they also generated a number of social measurable impact in the form of this particular seed, an enhanced seed, not only improved the quality of the soil, but also it demanded less quantities of pesticide. So this is good in two ways, because obviously it means more money in the pockets of the farmers, because they won't be spending as much in pesticides. So more money, that is your social impact. And they also had essentially a marketplace where they tried to remove the intermediaries from the farmers to the end distributors. So again, this reflected on more money in the pockets of the farmers. So in this case, you can clearly see, the measurable social and environmental impact in this case was clearly traced back to the capital that was injected that enabled the company to have these processes in place. That is the analysis we spoke about before.
Great. So we come almost at the end of our webinar for today, but maybe we take a question or two in the last minute or two that we have. So I'm looking here through the questions. So one question is, what would be the best sectors or industries that are best aligned for impact investing?
So that's a good question. So impact investing, it's very much a global, has a global reach, which means you can have impact investing in both emerging markets and mature markets. So essentially, you can also have investments in essentially the industries of the future. And it's very much about making sense of long-term trends in society and the planet. So to answer your question, some of these trends could be urbanization. More and more, people are moving into cities. This is a long-term growth trend. And so you would be looking at investment opportunities in infrastructure. You would also be accounting for investments in mobility. You also have another mega trend, for instance, population growth. Effectively, this translates into investment opportunities in food, energy, and water. So you're looking at agri-tech, the ones we talked about. You're looking at renewable energy, for instance. Another mega trend that you could have impact investments on is essentially aging. People are living longer as we age, and that translates into healthcare and health tech opportunities. Another important trend is decarbonization. This
Right.
is obviously growing more and more and translating more and more in terms of investable opportunities in stuff like natural capital, sustainable land use, like the one that we talked about before, utilization and resource efficiency. And that translates, for instance, into investable opportunities in the circular economy. So it's
Right.
essentially very much about, the industries of the future and about making sure that we account for the long-term growth trends. So impact investing is about long-term growth trends and the industries of the future.
Right. No, that's great. Great. I mean, we want to take more questions, but our time is up for today. And I want to thank once again Leonardo for making himself available for this webinar. So thank you very much, Leonardo, for taking the time today to share, you know, these insights with our audience, which I'm sure they can find interesting. So thank you very much for that. And I want to thank as well our audience for today for joining us. I hope you have found it insightful, and stay tuned for future webinars that we will be launching soon. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Leonardo, again. Thank you. Bye.